About there, and what do you see in the way that this case was filed?
Yeah, so in order for Trump to prevail, he would have to prove that the Wall Street Journal knowingly published an article that they knew was false, especially given that Trump tried to kill the article by talking to both the owner, Rupert Murdoch, and the editor-in-chief. And they went forward knowing that they were likely to be sued. So it sounds like they have a lot of confidence in their sources. In general, the standard is really high for a public figure like Trump to prevail in a case where he's accusing someone of defamation. It's true that he settled with CBS and ABC, but a lot of lawyers think that if a judge or jury had adjudicated those cases, that Trump would have lost. And now we think that based on the past. Trump sued the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN over their coverage of the Mueller investigation. All three of those cases got thrown out of court.
I think that's really important context that you bring there, Paul. But Kimberly, Trump suing the Wall Street Journal for at least $10 billion in damages. The sum, to me, told at least part of the story. What was your take on what we saw happen here?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that Paul said about this lawsuit really seeming weak. To me, as a former civil litigator, not only does he have to prove that the Wall Street Journal acted with actual malice or reckless disregard for the truth, he actually has to prove that it is false, that it was not something that he wrote, and also that his reputation was damaged. And of course, we've already seen videos of Trump hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. We already know in interviews he talked about him being a friend and enjoying young women. So the idea that this picture somehow in itself creates some new defamation point that harms his reputation, I think will be nearly impossible to prove. But this is Donald Trump trying to flex his legal muscle, put an absolutely, in my opinion, nonsensical sum on it. Usually you have to, the damages that you get is from the reputational damage. And as I noted, I can't see him proving that he suffered any at all in this case. So I think that this is largely frivolous, but the point isn't to win the case, right? The point is to try to pressure media organizations to bend to his will by the use of the court system, which he has consistently done. Unfortunately, we've known several cases where that has worked in the form of a settlement. But in this case, I do hope that the Wall Street Journal holds steady.
Yeah, that's why that number talked so loudly, at least to me, Kim, when I first saw this suit and the $10 billion figure attached to it. I think, Luke, the other side of the coin is, as much as we're talking about the fact that Trump likes to flex his legal muscle, the other output of filing a case like this means that it might stay in the news cycle for longer at a time when Trump keeps trying to tell people, let's stop talking about Epstein. Obviously, that hasn't worked yet, but does the White House have any concern that this could have the unintended effect of, yes, showing that Trump has legal fight, but then also that this is still very much in the news cycle?
Right. It's definitely a risk. This is the story that Donald Trump has not been able to outrun in his second term. Many times when there's a bad news cycle for the president, he's able to quickly move on to something else. You know, the Trump administration has this flood the zone strategy where they're doing so much all the time. It's hard for the news media and the public to keep up with them. But the Jeffrey Epstein files have dogged the president for more than 2 weeks now. And so what they've done with these latest moves, both the filing against the Wall Street Journal and also with the filing in New York to release some of the grand jury testimony, is they're trying to shift the focus of responsibility onto other people besides Donald Trump, right? They can unify the MAGA base, or at least attempt to, against a mainstream media outlet. That's been a strategy Donald Trump has used all along throughout his career. The other is that he can shift the blame for releasing documents not on himself at his own Department of Justice, but on a judge in New York, and can say, well, look, this federal judge is the reason you can't have more information, not Pam Bondi or myself. So will the MAGA base go along with this strategy and shift the blame onto others instead of the Trump administration? That remains to be seen, because right now Donald Trump is under a lot of political pressure from his very own supporters.
Yeah, and understandably so, right? Because while he was on the campaign trail, he and now other key officials of his orbit, who were once, of course, out of office and talking about this as lay people, were promising more transparency around the Epstein files. Now they are the very ones with control of the levers of power of government. And now that transparency is not coming. You know, Luke brought up something, Vaughn, about the DOJ requesting some grand jury transcripts to be released. It seems like at least one strategy that the administration might be using to try to let some steam out of the pot here. The thing is, hearings on that request may be secret, meaning the public wouldn't even see what the DOJ specifically requested, at least not at first. So are there other moves that the Department of Justice may take to try to satisfy these calls for transparency? We know that a special counsel is off the table, but as Trump gets more frustrated, as we reported over the weekend that he is, what else could come here?
Right. Well, they could do a lot. They could seek to unseal all of the evidence against Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Of course, it'd be up to a judge on whether to actually present that to the public or not. In this, a judge in the Southern District of Florida may very well hold a hearing to determine whether these grand jury transcripts, if in fact that is what the Department of Justice is seeking to release, will be released to the public, and to what extent are they redacted to protect victims or others who were never actually charged criminally. And I think that hits at the heart of what Luke was discussing here, and that is to what extent does this White House or allies of it try to put the onus on this Obama-appointed judge for not releasing the actual files. Now, I think this hits at the heart of actually new reporting over the weekend that I did with our Stephanie Rule. Steve Bannon, I think it's important to note, has been one of those allies who has been on the front lines calling for the unsealing of all the evidence in the Epstein files. At the same time, he has 15 hours of footage that he personally shot with Jeffrey Epstein back in 2019 before his rearrest in New York. I tried to get a hold of Steve Bannon to ask about the release of the footage. He has suggested that he will be releasing a documentary sometime next year, but that is a far cry from releasing all 15 hours of footage that he is in possession of. I talked to Mark Epstein, the brother of Jeffrey Epstein, who has said that he hasn't seen those 15 hours of footage and he wants access to them to hear directly from his brother and what he and Steve Bannon were discussing, Allie.
Yeah, and Bannon is yet another one of those MAGA figures that pushed for transparency on this, and now that is coming into direct conflict with what the White House isn't doing. I think, Paul, I want to focus on Jeffrey Epstein specifically here, because amid the calls for transparency are a desire to see who else his clients were. But he was known to Florida law enforcement, for example, after a 2006 investigation. Epstein was indicted and ultimately pleaded guilty to 2 state felonies, including soliciting a minor, criticized then as a sweetheart deal. He was mentioned to New York police. We know he had an estate in Ohio. So could any of the public release of more information end up sparking any new local investigations on any of these fronts when it comes to Epstein specifically?
Absolutely. So what the Attorney General is saying is that she's going to court to ask a judge to release evidence that she has no control over. The standard for violating the secrecy of a grand jury proceeding is very high, and I doubt that the Attorney General's claim that this case has involved a lot of public scrutiny. That's correct, but it doesn't, I think, meet that very high standard. When I was a prosecutor, I made hundreds of appearances before grand jurors. I always told witnesses that their testimony would be confidential. I doubt that a judge will want to, again, destroy that confidentiality based on Trump's political travails. But Ali, even more importantly, this grand jury testimony is just a small fraction of the Epstein file, which is 300 megabytes or gigabytes. That's millions of pages of documents. So right now, Attorney General Bondi could release the transcript of who visited Epstein's private island. She could release the wiretaps of Ms. Maxwell's phone, and she could release the hundreds of 302s. That's the FBI reports of witnesses who they interview. We know that a couple of those at least contain information about Donald Trump, not accusing him of any crime in relationship with Epstein, but noting that he was friends with Epstein, and in a couple of cases, noting that he made people in Epstein's world, one woman especially, feel uncomfortable. Again, she's not accusing him of a crime, but that claim would have been memorialized in the FBI report. Bondi could release those today if she wanted to.